We know that depreciation, it's about 11 billion. Let's look at their fixed assets. Actually, I'm going to do it annual. Let's see. Fixed assets are the non-current assets. They actually decreased by about $8 billion, 8.3. Okay. Does that mean that Apple did not make any investments into fixed assets? No. The reason that number is like that, existing fixed assets, I mean, last year I had $217 billion in fixed assets. And most fixed assets are subject to depreciation and amortization. And next year, if let's say I didn't buy any new fixed assets or I didn't sell any of the existing ones, the value of my fixed assets is going to go down next year by the amount of depreciation. So in the absence of any fixed asset transactions, I should have seen 206 billion or so. But I have 209. That means Apple actually added about $3 billion in new fixed assets, right? And change in net working capital is equal to change in current assets minus change in current liabilities. Oops. You can think of change in net working capital essentially investment into short-term assets. You know, if you increase your receivables, which is a current asset, that means you sold things to your clients, but they're going to pay you later, right? Well, that needs to be financed. That means you're investing into those assets. So looking at Apple, just annually, their current assets increased by about 8.5. Their current liabilities decreased by about 8.5 or 9, let's say. So total, their net working capital increased by about 17.5. So whatever you get from your operations as cash flow, you deduct how much cash you spent on fixed assets and how much cash you spent on net working capital. Whatever there is left, you're able to distribute to your shareholders and creditors. That's why we call it free cash flow. If you add these things up, actually, you can kind of see that CFFA is net income plus interest expense minus, where are you? I'm going to say NFA. That's another way of looking at the cash flow. Depreciation that you add in operating cash flow cancels out in the NCS. That's why it's not here. Now let's look at a few problems. By the way, cash flow from assets does not necessarily have to be a positive number, even when the companies are doing well. If the company is continuously growing and investing, cash flow from assets could be negative. Okay? Here's an example. Let's look at GE. Let's do income statements, annual. Well, they have a net income of 4.6. Let's see what their net interest, 260. These are in billions. Come on. Let me see. That's negative 27 or so. Come on. That's positive 1.5. That's also about positive 1.5. Well, in this case, it is $31 billion. But if you look at historically to GE, a lot of times you're going to see cash flow from assets being negative. Maybe these days GE is a little bit of a different company than it used to be. If you looked at GE 10 years ago, they were more of an industrial company. Nowadays, a big portion of GE is GE Finance, for example. So just because you have a negative cash flow from assets does not necessarily mean that company is in trouble. But if it keeps being negative for a long while and company is not growing, then you're in trouble. You're not generating enough income to service your creditors and return any money to your shareholders. So by itself, the negative sign or positive sign does not necessarily mean anything. Context is everything. We have about 15 minutes. So let's do some problems. Let me go back to my previous here. I mean, there's all sorts of videos, but since we have 15 minutes, I just want to go through a few problems. In the past, I had these online chapter quizzes, but those guys did not have exams. So let's start with this one. Don't want to worry about tax rates. Okay, copy. All right. This company had beginning retained earnings during the year. We know the sales, cost, depreciation, interest, and tax rates. And the firm also declared but not paid dividends. What is the retained earning balance? Well, ending retained earnings equals beginning retained earnings plus change in retained earnings, which is net income minus cash dividends. So we know the beginning retained earnings. We need to figure out net income and cash dividends. First, let's go with the easy one. What's the amount for cash dividends? Huh? How much? Are you sure? Read the question carefully. It will be zero because they have not paid it yet. When you declare a dividend, it just becomes a liability. It doesn't become cash dividends paid until you actually pay it.